Hey guys, I'm Rob Younkers. I'm a fashion and costume designer with 20 plus years of experience, an educator and lover of all things DIY. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Threadymade. Threadymade kits bring you New York City Garment District insider access that you've never had before. Threadymade pleating and smocking kits are going to allow you to create things that you've never been able to make at home before, and they're going to be key pieces in your new wardrobe. The great thing about these kits, they're accessible to people of all skill levels as far as sewing goes, and we cater to all shapes and sizes, so Threadymade is very inclusive. The other fun part, we're going to show you the steps to create these pieces, but we also want to know what you would do with them, how to put your own creative touch on them. So are you guys excited to start sewing? I'm going to walk you through all the steps. Ready, set, go! The Smocked top kit comes with all the things you need to make one of 3 options for this top. So first, let's run through the kit contents. In your kit, you have your smocked panels. So these are gonna come all cut for you, ready to put together. As you can see, the smocking is stitching done with elastic. These are the coolest little tops. Every hot girl in the 70s, 80s, 90s wore them, and now you're gonna have your own. The kit comes with the contents to do spaghetti straps, and also wider straps. So everything's pre-cut here. We have 4 pieces, so you have lots of different strap options. So here's the options. The strapless would look like this. For this sample, we created a halter using the wide straps attached in the front, or you can do these very 70s cool little spaghetti straps. So the kit comes with plenty of items to work with. I mean, some fun things you could do. You could braid the spaghettis, you can play around. Maybe your top has spaghettis in it. You tuck them in if you want to wear it strapless. So there's a ton of options for this. It's going to be your favorite summer top. So you guys want to make the smocked top. So does my friend Tiffany. Hi, Tiff. So the great thing about the smocked top, you only need one measurement to create this, and it's the bust measurement. So Tiffany, what I need you to do, and you guys can do this at home in front of a mirror, is just wrap this around, and you're going to measure the widest part of your chest. So if you can turn to the side, Tiff, you can see she's holding this at the center, or the apex, we call it in the fashion industry. And you're just going to wrap this around to snugly fit. Don't pull it too tight. Just want to make sure that it feels snug and secure. Does that feel good? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you guys are just going to want to record your measurement, and we're going to take this to the table. So we have the bust measurement, which happens to be 32 inches. Now, a little math. Don't be afraid, we're going to get through this. Smocking is elastic thread thrown across flat fabric. And that's how you get this stretch. So, like elastic, we're going to cut our panel smaller so that it hugs on the body. You got me? Okay. So, we have 2 panels, our front and our back. 32 inches. We've created a chart to make this really simple. Find your measurement in the chest sizes. The kit comes with 1 or 2 panels depending on the fabric. Each side seam for either kit has a 1-inch seam allowance already built into the cutting size on each seam. So we need to cut our 2 panels 12 inches across plus seam allowance. So in order to pin this for fitting, I'm going to add 1-inch seam allowance on each seam. So you want to start in from one of your panels, and we'll call this the front. So from our edge, I'm going to go ahead from a raw edge on one side and measure in 1 inch. We can use this as our first seam allowance. So go ahead and chalk. Now from this line, I'm going to measure 12 inches. I like to measure at a few intervals so that I can just connect the lines. So move down a little. Here's 12 more inches. So the reason that we're measuring 12 inches is because 24 divided by 2, the 2 being the front and the back, equals 12. So it will be 12 inches plus 1 inch of seam allowance on each side for our fitting. So go ahead and connect that line. Now, as you can see, I'm working on the wrong side of the fabric. I'm going to add 1 inch seam allowance. So it gets a little tricky when you hit the roughly portion of the smocked top. So what you want to do is, from your chalk line, kind of spread it out and continue your line up. So if you take a look here, I'm kind of spreading this and continuing. Okay? So spreading there, getting a flat area, and continuing my line up. So go ahead and do that on the bottom as well. So now I'm going to cut through my lines. And this finished panel for a 32-inch bust at the cut line. So we've got the front. What I now want to do is fold it in half. So you can use your top however you prefer. If you like the larger ruffle at the top, go for it. If you want the smaller ruffle at the top, you could switch it that way. We're going to do the smaller ruffle at the top. So what I want to do is find the center front, because when we fit this, we're going to use that pin as a place of measurement for our straps. So just go ahead and grab a safety pin. You can fold your top right in half and put a pin right up through the center. So that's your front panel. We're going to do the exact same steps on the back. So I've cut the back panel with the same measurements as the front, finishing off with that safety pin at center back after having folded it. So we've got our back panel and our front panel, which are exactly the same size. Next step's easy. We've got our side seam allowance that's 1 inch wide for fitting in case we need to adjust anything. I'm just going to pin this all the way down. Now when you're pinning your smocking, for fitting and for sewing, really important. So if I can hold this in a way where you can see, we want all the lines of our smocking to meet perfectly at the side seams. So make sure as you're pinning that you double check that you're doing that. So I'm going to pin both side seams on my 1 inch seam allowance. So I'm pinning on our actual stitch line. And then we've got the 1 inch seam allowance. In case we need to let parts of the top out, it's always easier to cut something larger than to cut it too small, because then you have to buy another kit. So I'm going to do this on both side seams, and the top will be ready for fitting. Checking those smocked lines meet up. Our top is ready for fitting. Now I'm going to work on the strap variations so that you can bring those into your fitting as well and decide which look you want to go for, whether it's the spaghettis, the wide strap, or strapless. Your kit comes with spaghetti straps, and there's plenty to work with. The great thing is these are sewn for you. They're really tiny, great, cool. They kind of give me a 70s vibe. Obviously you can attach these however you'd like. You can do 2 in the front, 2 in the back. They tie at the shoulder. You can play around and do a halter, because really what's holding the top up is the smocking itself. So you have a little bit of playroom with the type of straps and how you want to wear this. So those are ready to go. We're going to bring those to fit as well. So your kit also comes with 4 strips of fabric that are cut very long that you can use as 4 straps that tie up at the shoulders. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4. You can do 2 in the front to create a halter. So the other great thing about these is they come 4 inches wide. But if you prefer to make your strap smaller, you can play around with all the measurements. But you've got 4 inches to work with here. Just make sure you allow for seam allowance. So for the straps we're going to create, I'm going to simply fold this in half. I'm going to put a few pins in. And I'm going to create one end of the strap that's a mitered corner, which is cut at a 45-degree angle. Now, we don't want the selvage edge. You can see here this little bit of selvage edge, so I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that off. Now, starting 1/2 inch down from our point, I'm going to add a mark. Okay, going to bring that line across, and then I'm going to mark 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you don't even have to cut if you're going to create the straps, like so. So what you'll end up happening after you sew is you'll have a 1.5 inch strap. So pin and mark all the way down. As you're pinning, make sure to line those two raw edges up and you'll get a perfectly even strap. We're gonna continue pinning and marking. Remember, you're folding right sides together so that when you flip it to the correct side, you've got the outside of this denim fabric. I mean, listen, if you want to get creative, maybe you want it on the reverse. It's your world. So once you've marked all of your straps, I prefer for a fitting to just create all 4 straps. It's really easy sewing and it allows you a little bit of play time for trying the top on. Do you want 2 straps, 1 strap, spaghettis, wide, strapless? It's just nice to have all the options ready to go. So all I'm gonna do is add a 1/2 inch seam allowance at my mitered edge. This gives you the nice point at the end of your strap, like so, when it's finished. So starting a little bit below your mitered corner, we're going to stitch the strap closed. You want to make sure you back stitch at the top and the bottom and make sure you remove those pins before you sew through them. So now that the strap is sewn, we can go ahead and trim down the seam allowance. The reason that I have you sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance is you have a little bit more control on the machine than trying to sew with a 1/4. So take your chalk and your ruler, go ahead and mark a 1/4 inch from that stitch line. We're gonna mark all the way down. And we're gonna trim off that excess. So we can go ahead and trim. So at your point here, in order to get a really sharp point, you can go ahead, I'll hold this up, and cut about an 1/8 inch away from that point. And then continue cutting down that seam allowance to a 1/4 inch all the way. Okay, now we're gonna turn the strap. What you need to turn your strap is simply a ruler. We want something to get it started. So what I like to do is very carefully grab a scissor or a tip of one of these mechanical pencils, obviously without the lead coming out, and you're just gonna take this and start turning it inward at that mitered corner. You can see starting to push that corner in, just to get it started. And then what you want to do is grab your ruler and start pushing the right side towards the open end. So now I'm pulling all the way. Drop my ruler out. Voila, your strap is turned the correct way. So what you can do to get these points out is you're just gonna grab the fabric and start rolling back and forth. You can catch that. And you can work that corner out. Now the last step for the strap is we just need to press it flat. You want to make sure that that seam that we created is right on the edge. Again, just rolling it right to the edge, smoothing this, and we're gonna press nice and flat. You can use a little steam if you want as well. Just working in small segments so that you are getting that seam right at the edge. We're gonna continue pressing. Now we have all of our elements ready. We have the top spaghetti straps and our beautifully turned wide strap. So let's take this all and try this on Tiffany. So Tiffany's back and she's got the pin sample on. Tiff, how did we do with getting your measurements, cut,
feels really
fit?
good. Yeah.
It feels okay?
Yeah.
So you guys, when you're wearing the smock top, you wanna make sure that it's not gonna fall down, but you also don't wanna feel suffocated. So do you feel somewhere in between there?
Yeah, it feels really good.
Okay, cool. So you guys, you notice that I also put a pin at center front, and turn around for me, Tiff, and a pin at the center of the back. And that's gonna help us with placement of the straps. So Tiff, I'm just gonna show you how to place the straps, and for you guys at home, you can do this in front of a mirror. So I need you to help me hold the pins. Okay. So the two strap options are the wide strap, and we also have spaghetti straps. So you guys can put these on, whichever one you're using, you can pin them on the same way. So like I said, I would get in front of a mirror and kind of put them in place, Tiff. I find that it feels most youthful when the straps are further out rather than creeping in. It kind of opens up this area and it looks really nice. So all you guys need to do is kind of put it in place and take a look. And then you're just gonna use your safety pins. Be careful here. To just pin it in place. Now the reason that I marked the front and the back is because when you take this off to the table, you're going to measure equidistant so that the straps are in the same position on both sides. So again, it'd be the same thing for the spaghetti straps. So whether you're making, you know, the bow tie, a halter, it doesn't matter. So these are a little bit finer, so you wanna be careful with your pinning. So you just wanna, you know, if we're doing a halter, there's plenty to work with too, so you don't have to skimp with your excess. If you feel more comfortable, you can even pin on the outside for these. So what I'm gonna do, Tiff, is just pin up through. You guys can see how I pinned. And we would just transfer this measurement to the other side. All right, cool. All right, let me take this off each of the table and whip it all together.
Cool.
Okay, so our top fit Tiffany perfectly. We don't have to adjust our side seams. We have center front and center back still safety pinned, as well as marks for our straps. So we can go ahead and unpin the side seams. Now we have our front and back panels separate. Remember, we marked where we want our straps on one side, and what we'll do is use our center front and center back safety pin to measure that equal distance. We'll pin this so that the straps sit exactly in the same place on both sides of the top. So our pin placement on the front is 5 inches. I'm gonna go ahead and flip this over and mark on the back. So you can see the pins here. The pins come through from here to here. So I'm marking at 5 inches. And we have our center front pin, so I'm going to measure 5 inches from there. Okay, so that will be the inside of the strap. So if we use the wide strap, it'll sit right in the middle. Go ahead and do the same on your back. So we have the wrong side of our fabric, and the measurement is 4 3/4. So I'm gonna do a mark, then I'm gonna go 4 3/4 from this side, and mark. So now we know exactly where we need our straps to go. So we can remove the safety pin. Before you remove any safety pins, always make sure that you've marked with chalk first. Once that safety pin comes out, it's really hard to find those marks again. So make sure everything's marked with chalk. And now, for either strap option, if we want to use spaghettis, we'll use the center of that chalk as our measurement. You just want to take your strap, take a look at that first row of smocking. We're going to line this up about one smocking row below. So if you see here, the end of my strap is hitting that second row of smocking. So we would just pin this in place. Make sure that you don't pin your ruffles over to the side. You know, if you're pinning it and it folds, you want to make sure it's nice and flat. So you can kind of pull it open a little bit with one row of smocking hitting the end of our strap. Place a pin to hold it. And if we're doing 4 straps, we would do this on all 4 sides. If we're doing a halter, we only need to do the front 2. So again, just take your strap. We're going to put the inside end of the strap on our second row of smocking here. And pin. For the wide straps, what I'm going to do is use our strap marker as the outside of the strap. So here's our mitered corner. We want to use the other end to attach inside. What we want to do is clean finish the inside of these straps as nicely as we can. So what I'm going to do is fold back about 1 inch. Again, the straps are very long. If in your fitting you decided to shorten them, you'd want to mark that as well. But I like the straps long, so we're going to keep them there. I'm folding back 1 inch. We're going to go to our smocking, and here's the mark we'll use for the outer edge of our strap. I'm going to go ahead, place that fold line on our second row of smocking. So if you see here, we folded the inch. I'm placing this like so and pinning it in 2 spots. Then we'd take this to the machine. We're going to add 2 rows of stitching. We'll trim down that little seam allowance and you have a really nice strap finish on the inside. So, depending on what option you're doing, 4 straps, 2 straps, no straps, you'd go ahead and follow the same method for each style. If you're doing strapless, you can pin it right back together and go to the machine. So now we have our straps in place. For this sample, I'm creating a halter. So you would only need 2 straps in the front. Now, if you remember, we added 1 inch seam allowance to our seams for the fitting in case of adjustments. We didn't need to make any adjustments for Tiffany, so we can go ahead and trim down that seam allowance to 1/2 inch. You can go ahead and cut it right off if you've got great eyes. Otherwise, definitely feel free to take your chalk and just mark the 1/2 inch. This will eliminate a lot of bulk at the side seam, which we don't want to create with this top. It's so fitted as is. So go ahead and mark 1/2 inch on both sides of your front. Flattening out that ruffle. Also, trimming down the seam allowance in the back to 1/2 inch. And then we can trim off that excess. Remember, carefully cutting through the ruffle that's created at the top of the smocking. Just trim this down to 1/2 inch. Repeating on all of our seams. Now we've trimmed down all of our side seam allowances to 1/2 inch. Let's go ahead and pin the top together to sew. Remember, when you're pinning, you want to have the right sides together. So obviously this is our front. Matching up those lines of smocking for our final pinning and sewing so that they're even all the way across. Pinning close to the edge. Every few inches. So you can see I'm flipping up to make sure my lines match up. Go ahead and pin all the way on one side. You're going to do the other side, and I will meet you at the machine. As we sew the side seams of the smock top, you've got a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You want to make sure to remove the pins before they get under the needle, and be very careful at the top because you've got this little bit of gathering, so you just want to smooth that out before you get started. Go ahead and sew the other side seam of your top. Okay, so to sew the straps in place, we want to put a stitch, an 1/8 inch on each side of our first row of smocking. So we're gonna have a stitch an 1/8 inch up and an 1/8 inch down. So if you don't want this seam allowance sticking out on your side seams, what you can do, push down that seam allowance below your bust line on both side seams. You want to be a little bit beneath so that these don't pop out. And we're just going to put a stitch line across this area. We're going to go very close to the edge. Trim our threads. Now your side seams look clean on the outside. If you prefer to use the spaghetti strap, it's going to be sewn on the exact same way as the wide strap. We're doing a row of stitching, an 1/8 inch above the first row of smocking and an 1/8 inch below.